Hey, what's up, guys? What's up, fellowship? What's up, all you Tolkien fans out there, Tolk folk? Hey, John here from the Tolkien Road. So I've been wanting to do a video on the compression of the timeline that apparently is going to be happening in the Rings of Power TV show from Amazon. I I've been putting this off a little bit because I'm just trying to gather all my thoughts, and I have so many, and it's not an easy topic to just go right at. Um, because I don't know that Tolkien directly, like he directly rebuked anybody like for compressing the timeline in his age. So you can't really point to one thing that he said and say, this says don't do that. But this is a topic that's been pretty heavy on my heart. And honestly, of the controversies that have come out, that have developed already, um, with regard to these things, honestly, this one is the most concerning to me. Um, you can see the latest live stream we did for for my takes on some of the other controversies that are there. I'm actually not too broken up or worried about anything I've seen so far, except for this thing, right? Except for um, this attitude towards timeline compression that the creators of the Rings of Power seem to be taking. So I want to start this conversation with you guys, and it's going to be a little rambling because this is the thing that's heaviest on my heart right now. And I want you guys to like tell me if I'm off base here, right? I want you to tell me if like why I should be okay with this, because I want to like this show. I want to be a fan. This is a big deal. The show, is going to be a big deal for Tolkien fans. It's a big deal in the future. And I'm a person who is like, I want to see more stories told in Middle Earth. I really do. Um, but I want it to be done the right way. And I want it to be as true to Tolkien as possible, as true to what he would have wanted as possible, right? So that's what I'm constantly on a mission to discover. By the way, please subscribe, like this video, subscribe to the Tolkien Road channel, and comment below. Okay. So here's the quote of concern comes from from the Vanity Fair article that came out a few weeks ago and introduced us to the first look at the Amazon series. So I'm going to read this paragraph. In the novels, the aforementioned things take place over thousands of years, meaning the Second Age, right? The events of the Second Age. But Payne and McKay have compressed events into a single point in time. It is their best deviation from the text, and they know it's a big swing. We talked with the Tolkien estate, says Payne. If you're true to the exact letter of the law, you're going to be telling a story in which your human characters are dying off every season because you're jumping 200 years in time, and then you're not meeting really big, important canon characters until season 4. Look, there might be some fans who want us to do a documentary of Middle Earth, but we're going to tell one story that unites all these things. So, um, I just I read that whole article and I was like, okay, interesting stuff here. And then I kind of was, this is sounded like it could be pretty good. And I got to that part and I was just like, you got to be kidding me. Really? This thing, this is what they get to use right here. This is basically what they're going to be basing the series off of in terms of what Tolkien himself established and we're talking about. And there's other parts to it, but this is kind of that main thing, right? That Appendix B timeline of the Second Age. And it goes from year 1 to year 3441. So almost 3,500 years elapse. That's a long time. That is a very, very long time. That is so, and I don't know exactly what they mean by this. Okay. But let's just take that logic. Let's say you wanted to tell a story about human history, right? And just maybe tell a story that connects a figure such as King David, who lived 3,000 years ago by most estimates I've seen, right? So like 1,000 BC, okay? Lived 3,000 years ago. So that's not even 3,500 years ago. Let's say you wanted to tell a story about human history and you start with King David and, it ends in modern day. So you're basically saying it's cool if I just take King David and Joe Biden and put them in the same era. I mean, that's just sloppy. And it's so distorting. Um, you do, I understand where they're coming from, but I just, man, I'm like, you got all this money and you can't do better. You can't take the time to come up with a story that tells what you have to tell, and find some narrative methods that work to do this. Okay. Maybe it's flashbacks. Maybe it is doing a seasonal approach, right? First season is like, you know, establishing Elros as well as the elf characters, the main elf characters. And then you jump forward to maybe the era of Aldarion and Erendis, right? So you kind of see the development of the sea culture of Numenor, right? There'd be plenty of stories to tell there, right? And then you jump forward until the Sauron reawakens for the first time, which is actually like 2,000 years before the events that I think the show is going to be focused on. And I mean, there's definite beats that you can hit in those seasons. Or maybe you just tell a story that focuses on the last few years of the Second Age and the big events that are in focus, but you do flashbacks to like develop the story and nurture the story, right? There's so many different ways that you could approach this. No one's, I mean, look, yeah, it would be cool if somebody spent all the money to do a documentary, but I never thought they were going to do it like a documentary style. I know they want to tell a dramatic narrative, right? But it doesn't have to be a documentary. Like no one's asked, like, I don't think there are actually people who would love to see that, right? Who said they love to see that. But my point is, you don't have to do it that way to be true to what Tolkien established. Okay. You can go through and figure out, hey, here's the big beats of this thing. And here's how we tell this story, right? Here's how we're true to what Tolkien established. Now, some of you might be like, what's the big deal? I mean, they gotta keep it interesting, for all the non-Tolkien people. Well, there's a few things in my mind. I mean, first of all, there's the thing I just said about, like, do you understand how long a period of history that is? And it's absurd to think about collapsing human history to such a, in a unless you're going to tell some kind of like sci-fi story, right? Like in the sense of telling the kind of fantastical realism that Tolkien has developed here, it's absurd to think about telling a story of human history where you're like King David and Joe Biden coexisting in the same era, right? That's just, who would even think of doing that, right? So I look at this too, and I think of one of the key themes of Middle Earth, of the entire legendarium, that being elves are immortal, men are mortal, right? From the very beginning of the awakening of the children of Iluvatar and the Silmarillion, Tolkien highlights this, right? He highlights this, and it's supposed to be a very strong juxtaposition in terms of the themes that we're looking at within Middle Earth. Okay, we as human beings, how many of us, every one of us at some point in our lives has thought, man, I wish I could live forever, right? I wish I could be immortal and not have to worry about death, right? It, like, Middle Earth is about, like, the stories of Middle Earth. They are about like the escape, like wanting to escape from death, right? Wanting to escape from the shadow of death. What do you think the shadow is, right? I mean, shadow is domination, but it's also the domination of death and evil, right? So, we think that it would be all hunky dory, like it would be just wonderful to be able to just live forever. And the elves are supposed to be there to say, like, there's a lot of good things about it, but there's also a lot of bad things about it. Okay. And when you try to achieve that in worldly terms, some bad things start happening. Okay. You think about the ring wraiths, right? You think about Gollum. Okay. And these figures did live for long periods of time, right? When they shouldn't have. Okay. And so we're taking that theme and we're kind of cutting the feet out from under that theme by doing this. Okay. At least in theory. We would have, if you told the entire 3,500 year history throughout this, in whatever way throughout this TV show, you would have Galadriel, you would have a young Elrond from the very beginning, you would have Gilgalad, you would have any number of elf characters, right? Elvish characters. You could probably throw in some other characters, right? You could probably throw in Treebeard in there, right? Heck, you might even be able to find Tom Bombadil in there in some way, right? You'd have all these other characters that you'd have Maiar characters, right? the potential, there's plenty of characters that have this immortal lifespan that could be the characters that care if you told it in a linear fashion and just jump forward every season, right? A few hundred years, you could do this where you have these characters that exist, are immortal, right? And you see them develop over the course of this. But then within each season, the mortal characters maybe die off, but you have new mortal characters that replace them. Okay. So it's just, I'm not buying it. It's like, we talked with the Tolkien estate. I love how this is. I don't know, to be fair, somebody else edited this article, not Payne, not the guy who said this, but, or who's being quoted. But it's like, we talked with the Tolkien estate. Now, I think if the next thing he said is actually what's printed here, then it's like, what did they think? Were they just like, oh, it's cool, right? Or were they like, actually, we prefer you didn't do this? And you're like, well, we're going to do it anyway. We just wanted to let you guys know, right? Like, what did they think? Was there nobody within the Tolkien estate that was kind of like, well, it was kind of important? Because then my question is, who the heck is running the Tolkien estate? And do they care about anything but just the bottom line? I mean, this is so disappointing that they wouldn't stand up for, for the professor style, against this, right? And say, no, you've got to do it this way. And that really gets me to one of the most concerning things, something I've been thinking a lot about lately. Who is really sticking up for canon? I know that they've got people, they supposedly got some people who are Tolkien scholars, on staff. But how much of a say do they have? And how true are they really striving to be to the canon, right? To like actually investing themselves and saying, we've got to be letter of the law with the lore. And I know he says in here, he's like, if you're true to the exact letter of the law, you're going to be telling a story in which the human characters are dying off. He's like the letter of the law. And I'm like, yes, like you should be striving to be true to the letter of the law in these things. Okay. This is something that a man spent his whole life working on, and means an incredible amount to millions of people around the world before you ever came in. We want to see this thing succeed. We want this to be the beginning of a new age of like being able to develop the lore of Middle Earth, but we got to be true to the things that came before. We got to be true to Tolkien's own vision. Because if not, then you might as well do whatever, right? You might as well just do whatever you feel like doing. I don't know. What do you guys think, right? Like this video if you agree, I guess you're going to dislike the video if you don't agree. Hey, hit that subscribe button. Okay. And I want to hear from you guys in the comments. I mean, what do you guys think? Are you cool with this? And if you're cool with this, why? If you're not cool with it, what other reasons do we need to highlight? Because, like I said, this is a little bit rambling. I just feel like I've got so many issues with it, and I'm just struggling to get it all down on paper. So I just wanted to come talk to you guys about it. So, and I just think here's the other thing. Here's the other big picture thing. I was kind of, well, maybe a couple of things, right? Okay. So I remember back, you guys remember back, if you're like, you're like me, you grew up with Star Wars. If you're of my generation, you grew up with Star Wars. You dreamed of the day that maybe you get some sequels to Star Wars, right? And then the sequel trilogy came out, and it was just a huge disappointment for me and for a lot of people. There's probably, I'm sure there's some who, really like it and enjoy it, but for me, it was a huge disappointment. And I feel like it's some of the same issues, right? They justified cutting corners. They justified narrative risk taking or narrative directions based on I don't know what, but certainly not seemingly based on the fans, right? And based on what came before. It seemed like there were other decisions, and this is one other thing I worried about, is this like ideological imposition, right? Like, these different, basically what I view it as is like different factions trying to fight a culture war in Middle Earth, right? People want to come in and scour the Shire, right? People want to come in and leverage the Shire for their own purposes. And to offend that to people on all kinds of sides of the ideological spectrum, right? Because Tolkien wasn't about to let somebody else come in and impose his ideology on his world. We see that in letter responses. We saw that with his rebuke of Nazi ideology. He just wasn't for that. He wasn't going to allow these different ideologies to come in, and impose their will on what he was doing. So, the other thing I just think of too is Tolkien's decided love and advocacy for ancient tradition and for ancient cultures, and in his contempt for so many aspects of modernity, right? Of modernity, of postmodern. Doesn't mean he hated all of it. It just means that he was the general attitude, the general philosophy that was kind of built upon this nihilistic view of the universe. He rejected that, right? And he looked back with great admiration for the peoples of the past. And when you do this, I mean, basically, what are you doing? You're flattening the ages, right? Like that's one of the greatest things about these stories is you read the Lord of the Rings and you just think to yourself, man, this is vast, like not just in terms of the world, but in terms of the history as well. Okay. Like just the ages upon ages, lifetimes upon lifetimes that have elapsed in some of these things. And thinking back that, Sam and Frodo and these and our buddies here in the fellowship, like they're learning about these like ancient stories, right? Like the story of Beren and Luthien when Aragorn is singing that, right? And they're just like, what is this about? I mean, this is a story that happened ages ago, but here they are singing about it, 6,000 years before they're learning about it in Lord of the Rings. And that's such a beautiful thing, this connection they feel with where they are right now with this ancient story. And we in the modern world are so disconnected from our history, especially in the West, right? We just don't even pay attention to anything that happened more than 15 minutes ago. So, that's another thing that I just think strikes directly at the heart of what Tolkien was all about with doing this. And, you think about it, like, you ever just feel like the world just feels so flat these days, right? You think about ancient peoples and the idea of like traveling, like just, from where I am here to where Tolkien lived his life in the UK, right? This vast ocean between those two places. And for most of human history, that wasn't even crossable by most people. And then finally, people started to do it about 500 years ago. And then, but even that was a dangerous thing for a very long time, really until the last century. Okay. And then you develop air travel. And it's like, well, you can get there in a couple hours, right? I mean, that just flattens the world. And there's no sense of like being able to just get lost in this wilderness of just wonders. Who knows what you're going to find? And to me, that's one of the things that draws me to Middle Earth, that makes me love it so much. And I think that it applies in an analogous way to the timeline, right? That there's all these different corners. Tolkien lays out 3,000 years of history on this timeline in a couple of pages right here. But each one of those lines could be its own season of a TV show, right? I mean, there's stories upon stories in there, but we're just going to like collapse it and tell this synopsis of everything. You guys, it just doesn't sit well with me. It doesn't sit well with me at all. I mean, if you agree, hit that like button. If you agree, definitely subscribe to this channel, because I feel like I'm gonna have to do some more development of these thoughts. I mean, do you guys like this kind of more extemporaneous, unprepared, just kind of jotted down some notes talk? Let me know. I feel like I'm kind of getting these things off my heart. As someone who just loves Tolkien, loves Middle Earth so much. So I'm trying to see here if I've got any, more notes, really big points that I want to make with this, but I'm genuinely interested to hear from you guys. What do you think? And if you want to try to help me feel better about it, please do. If you agree with me and can highlight some other reasons that you think this is a bad idea, please do that. Look, excuse me. Look, I am not here to rain on any parade. I really want to be able to enjoy this show. I want all of us as fans to be able to enjoy this show. And I want it to be the beginning of being able to tell more stories in Middle Earth. but it needs to be done the right way. It needs to be done with guardrails. It needs to be done with intense love, devotion, respect for what the professor established, and even for the things that, you know, were kind of his offhand writings, right? We like the people who develop these things need to be like academic level, PhD level students of these things, right? They need to know the lore. They need to love the lore. They need to just have unfailing respect for the letter of the law, right? For the letter of what Tolkien wrote. There's far more than people realize. And I think if you spend time, you may say, well, he didn't say anything directly about this. But if you spend time with his letters, if you spend time with the history of Middle Earth, if you spend time with Unfinished Tales, which is things he said in all these different places, you're going to find his heart, right? You're going to find where he's coming from. And if you don't get there, how can you justify being, you know, the captain of the good ship Amazon when it comes to the rings of power, right? How can you justify this to yourself as a creative, as a fellow creative, right? I just want them to respect. I just want them to respect the things he did. So, yeah, subscribe to this channel if you liked this. Like that video. Leave me a comment below. Let's talk about it. And hey, thanks. I appreciate you guys listening to this rant. And I will talk at you next time. Bye, everybody.